Okay, let's take Omniverse Create for a spin, exploring some of the Prim types and their properties. Okay, so to launch Omniverse Create, most applications you start from the Omniverse launcher. I've got that pinned to my docking bar down the bottom here. So we're going to launch Create. You have to go to Exchange to install it first, and then once it's installed, you go to the library. On the side menu, it's got Create. You click that and click the launch button. Now it can take a while to launch, depending on your size of the machine. So I've actually got it started up already over here. So just to run through the main areas, the main area here is the viewport. You can use your mouse to look around in objects in the viewport. That's the middle mouse button, doing a pan, right mouse button, doing looking from side to side. You'll find if you hold down the Alt key, you can keep the center point and sort of rotate around the center point. Middle button moves, and so frankly, I can never remember all the commands. I just start clicking buttons and moving things around and mouse wheeling and so forth, just to work out how to navigate around the viewport. But that's how you look around. So this is actually a plain object in the middle. We've got some buttons over on the side here. This one, the first button, is a move button. The one underneath it is to rotate. And so if we pick that, we can actually rotate the plane around. Control Z to undo. You can also scale it bigger and larger and so forth. So over here on the right, we have an important window called the stage. This is a hierarchical representation of all the objects on the stage, and we don't have much here at the moment. We do have a ground plane. We've also got some lights on the stage, and so this is a default scene that when you just start it up and you create new stage, it just gives you a few objects to start off with, which is the sky, a distant light to shine down on things on the stage, and it puts this in an environment folder, and there's another world folder it puts up there. So normally when you drop things into the viewport, it'll go under the world, but the lighting and so forth goes underneath environment. By default, these are not required by USD. These are just some Omniverse conventions, and they work quite well. So the way you identify a Prim is using a path. So for example, the ground Prim, if we have a look in the property section down here, each Prim is really a node in the tree. They've got a series of properties, and the path to this Prim is /environment/ground. So if you look under looks, if I click down here, there's be environment/look/grid/shader. So there's a hierarchical path to navigate down to objects in the hierarchy, which they call prims. So for your Unity user, you'd say these are game objects, but they call them prims, which is short for primitive elements. Now each prim has got a type, and if we look over in the column over here on the right, there's a type. So a XForm prim type is a shorthand for transform, and so it has properties. We can look down at the properties. It's got effectively the rotation, translation, and scaling properties. So you can move it around in 3D space, anything with an XForm. Now you can have other properties as well on the Prim, but that's the primary purpose of an XForm. A transform is to group a series of things that you want to move around together. There is also a scope. If I look at this looks directory, looks is where they convention in Omniverse is to store materials and things that make things look a bit different. So they don't actually appear as objects in the scene. When I select upon it, there's nothing over here in the scene that gets highlighted. And so it doesn't really have the concept of a 3D space. And so that's when they use a scope. So the scope type is used to indicate it's useful for grouping, but it doesn't have a position in 3D space, and so it doesn't have the transform offsets. Another one is mesh. So the ground is a very simple representation. It's got a surface to it. It's got a mesh. This has actually also got a material on it, and you can put different sorts of materials onto the mesh. There's some materials over here, and so I could drop a different material on and or change its color. brick pattern might make more sense. And then if I zoom in, you can see I've got some bricks. And so you can drop materials, and as I use a material, it's going to add it to the scene. Now I didn't actually use the aluminium, so I'm going to get rid of that one, but I've got the brick paver material as well. And over here it's a material, is the actual pattern, and the actual ground plane is actually a mesh, because it's got a 3D representation in the space, and the material down here, you can see which material I've dropped onto the mesh to change how it looks. It just puts a new texture over the top of it. There are lots of other sorts of prims you can create. So if you right click on a prim, it's got a create menu. There's other menus you can do over here with the create menu over here as well. But if I just come back over to this one, we've got different sorts of meshes. So there's got cones and cubes and cylinders and discs and planes, and so this is one of the planes. You've got some more shapes. You've got capsules and cones and cubes. There's different lights you can add to the scene, and some audio players, cameras for looking at things, materials, scripting, curves, animation, flows, physics, and so forth. So there's quite a few different types of prims. The most common ones are X-form for moving or positioning objects in space and potentially grouping all the children underneath. It's very common. Scopes, which are for grouping but don't have a position, so it's just semantically clearer. Then you've got lights and shaders and materials and so forth. Now you can also define your own types, but you're allowed to define custom properties down here. And so the usual recommended approach is, if you're trying to come up with your own type, just use some custom properties to start with. Once you're happy with it, then go off and create a custom type for that. Well, that's all I wanted to get into this one. We're just introducing the basics, which is the fact that you've got primitives in a hierarchy, and primitives have got properties. I should have mentioned also that the properties, you can see the representation. Some are checkboxes, there'll be Boolean types, some have got values, some have got colors, and so the properties are typed, which allows the user interface to work out how to display it well. Okay. So in the next episode, what we're going to have a look at is actually starting to build a real stage and get our hands dirty a little bit. See you then.